Hello and welcome guys. This is Jerome S. Agas taking a Masteral of Computer in Engineering, Special in Data Science and Engineering, study from Polytechnic University of the Philippines. The subject is Intelligent System and Robotics by Dr. Ryan Evangelista. The task is to dissect the research paper in review, and the assigned number in my review is number 4. They're talking about the posterior beliefs, prior beliefs, or the Bayesian method. The title of the research I dissect is the use of Bayesian method in financial research. Okay, who have done the work? Okay, number 1 is Kristine Beck from USA, and her email is kristine.beck@csun.edu. So the second author is Bruce Niendorf from USA, and their contact or the email is niendorf@uwosh.edu. Okay, the third or the last person or the last author is Pamela Peterson from USA. Her email or contact is drakebpp@jmu.edu. What were their goals or objectives? So their goals or objectives is to investigate the use of Bayesian analysis in financial research over the last 42 years. So they have the restriction, the last 42 years from the financial research. And first, we need to know the difference between the Bayesian versus the classical statistics. So frequentist statistics or classical statistics. So they are the other term of the classical statistics. So never uses or calculates the probability of the hypothesis, while Bayesian uses probabilities of data and probabilities of both hypotheses. So they are not the same method of how they calculate the probability of the hypothesis. Frequentist method do not demand construction of a prior and depend on the probabilities of observed and unobserved data. Okay? So they find several violations of classical statistical assumption in the standard methodology, and that the result of previous studies on the weekend effect are sensitive to the estimation method and the sampling period. So they find out the classical, they have a big effect for the weekend. So that's why they use the Bayesian method. Okay, let us see what were the research questions, if any. Actually, not applicable because the author uses information about past events to predict the future events. Well, letter G, what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? So number 1, how have they gathered relevant data? So the subtitle to the number 1 is who are the participants? Actually, the financial firms, because the financial firms is most frequent studies about the finance or the financial. So the researchers targeting the financial firms to get article or data from them. Okay. So next is how is the data gathering set up? Observation and collection of articles. They observe and scraping rather the articles, scraping or collecting. And next is what are the tools and techniques used in data gathering. So scraping from existing article. Actually, they almost same from the previous, but this is the tools and techniques scraping. What were their methods in terms of but not limited to? How did they form the data set? So the subtitle for this is how they clean the data. Actually, not applicable because there's no need to clean the data because they are scraping from other article. Okay, number 3, how do they process the data and or how do they develop the fuzzy logic? Actually, they use Bayesian method, that's all. So the probability of probability. Okay. So what were their findings? They find that even though studies using Bayesian method appear in finance's top journals, Bayesian analysis is not applied in enough of the research in which it would be useful. Next is, in most applications, a 0.5% abnormal return may not be economically significant, but if we choose our sample size to be sufficiently large, we will be able to conclude that this difference is statistically significant. Okay, so not all the time they use Bayesian methods because there are restrictions, there are circumstances that the Bayesian method has disadvantages. So, which is sometimes they are useful and sometimes they're unuseful, or they have other method better than the Bayesian methods. Okay, so letter F, or the last, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? The use of Bayesian method in finance research decreased in the early years of this century. Okay, decrease. So, based on their studies in the last 42 years, if the early years of the century is decreased, so the late years, they increase the use of Bayesian method in finance research. So, that's my conclusion for this. The use of method of finance is increasingly. So that's all. The Intelligent System and Robotics paper review. Thank you very much. God bless.